Bonjour à toutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I declare this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 28 of the Standing Committee of Official Languages of the House of Commons.
And members will attend in person or with the Zoom application. À la lumière.
Given health recommendations because of the pandemic, anyone participating in this meeting in person must follow the directives of the Board of the Internal Economy. I'd like to thank the members in advance for their cooperation.
Challenges arise, please advise me. Know that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Donc, conformément à
So, pursuant to the referral from May 30th, 2022, the committee is resuming study of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact the use of French in federally regulated Private Businesses Act and to make related amendments to other acts. I would now like to welcome our first witness, Ms. Linda Cardinal, Associate Vice Rector of Research at the Université de l'Ontario Français, Stephanie Chouinard, Associate Professor, Department of Political Science at the Royal Military College of Canada and Department of Political Studies at Queen's. Welcome. And as you know, there were votes at the House, so our meeting was shortened a bit, but we will leave you time to introduce your points before we start questions. Before you speak, please wait to be recognized, and then anyone will be able to activate their microphone. Otherwise, you should be on mute. If you would like to speak, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, as I repeat, your microphone should be on mute. This will avoid echoes in the room. You have a maximum of 5 minutes, as I said, for your speech. So now we'll start with Ms. Cardinal. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Hello. Chair, members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages at the House of Commons, colleagues, hello to all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me today to present my analysis of Bill C-13. I will present my conclusions right again. There are serious flaws with respect to public servants being able to work in French in the federal government. Also with respect to appointing officials in French and with respect to French students from abroad. Bill C-13 may be able to remedy some of these issues, but they need to be given realistic objectives. So I would ask you to adopt Bill C-13 without delay. I would also like to bring to your attention a few recommendations, administrative in nature, essential measures that need to accompany the implementation of Bill C-13. These are recommendations to focus on leadership on official languages within the federal government. And before I talk about my recommendations, I would like to remind everyone that governmental and non-governmental agencies have worked to modernize the OLA, and the bill you have before you is a reasonable compromise of all stakeholders. There are realistic and necessary objectives to move official languages forward, and it recognizes the vulnerability of French and the need for Francophone immigration targets. It may contribute to the cultural change that is necessary to support the Francophonie and French. But if you want to change culture, you cannot wait for a perfect piece of legislation. It'll never be perfect. Moreover, the members won't be implementing Bill C-13. It'll be public servants. We have to give them realistic objectives so that to do their work. As I said earlier, we need to establish regulations and programs, and this is why I am opposed to a central agency within the Treasury Board. I think that this goes against the regulations of the federal government, and the coordination mechanism seems more reasonable to me. The Treasury Board cannot present programs or look at the policies of other departments. It will be able to oversee administrative requirements, and transferring such an important responsibility to the Treasury Board would also delay the implementation of C-13, and some cases even stall it, given the natural resistance to embrace change. I would like to see departments such as Canadian Heritage, the Treasury Board Secretariat, Justice Canada, Immigration and Citizenship Canada, Employment and Development in particular, Stats Canada and the Privy Council Office continue to work together to develop a coordination and accountability framework for the implementation of C-13. Thanks to its action plan, the government will also be able to establish timelines and a schedule for the implementation of objectives. I recommend the creation of a cabinet committee on official languages and francophonie, whose role it would be to set up a mechanism for consulting ministers with responsibilities in the area of official languages, and to provide clear guidance in the case of federal-provincial agreements, and to review the process for appointing bilingual people to senior management positions. As I said, the new Bill C-13 proposes a reasonable balance and reasonable objectives, and a balance between formal equality and substantive equality. It is based on principles that have long been called for by Canada's Francophone minority communities, namely the recognition of the vulnerability of French as an official language, and the need for the OLA to be remedial in nature and to confirm the principle of substantive equality. These principles should guide the interpretation of language rights. And sorry, Ms. Cardinal, you'll have to summarize. Go ahead. In summary, I will propose to intervene, particularly in the area of immigration, with a francophone immigration that is different from other programs. And thank you very much, Madam Cardinal. Ms. Chouinard, you have 5 minutes. Hello, Chair. Thank you very much for this invitation to appear before you today. Many of you have heard me speak on other occasions on this act, an important bill that should have cross-party support, but for which, for a variety of reasons, has taken a beating over the past 50 years. I've also had the opportunity to write about this issue in a number of newspapers and articles over the past few years. So I will provide more details about a few aspects of the former Bill C-32 and Bill C-13. I won't have the time to go into great detail, but I would ask you to look at my documentation if it interests you. So I will focus on 3 things today. First, a few words about the principle of substantive equality, which underlines many aspects of this bill. This is the explicit legislative recognition for the first time of a principle that has existed for quite some time in the governance of official languages, namely that in order to achieve equality between official languages, one deserves different support, particularly with respect to minority language institutions where there is a majority sociolinguistic context. It's an important step forward in the area of official languages. The legislative framework reflects the interpretation of the Supreme Court, where this principle has been used since the end of the past decade. However, there is still a lack of understanding in general of substantive equality in the population in general. In English Canada, there's a real need for public education on the meaning and impact of substantive equality, so that the new version of this act is not interpreted as a simple rejection of the equal status of English over French. The issue of clarification, in my opinion, is urgent given the political context. We don't want to have a backlash against the French language outside of Quebec. I'd also like to point out that the federal government has to commit to strengthening access to post-secondary education in the official language of the minority. This field has been in crisis for the past few years, with the culmination in 2021 with the collapse of Laurentian University, and we know that the vitality of our communities is at stake when minority communities cannot pursue their studies in French. And these institutions should no longer be on the brink. They have to be able to plan for their future. It's essential that the federal government also invest. It is their jurisdiction as well. So a year ago, when you studied federal support for Francophone institutions, I said this was also an important component in the long term. The post-secondary sector has seen a lack of engagement from the provincial governments, and it's up to the federal government to step in. Finally, with respect to Section 44 on Francophone immigration, the language used in this bill is disappointing. It doesn't go far enough to ensure that the necessary changes are made to the unacceptable and sometimes shameful policies and practices of the Department of Citizenship and Immigration in Canadian Francophonie. We have already reaped the results of almost 2 decades of insufficient action in this area, and so much so that the FCFA felt the need to sound the alarm this winter. The new OLA must be more directive in order to ensure that not only we have truly restorative targets, allowing Francophones outside of Quebec to maintain their demographic weight in this society, and also that these communities have the support they need to welcome and support these newcomers in an appropriate fashion. In conclusion, despite these remarks, I would like to leave you with one last message. We shouldn't let better be the enemy of good. It is high time to modernize the OLA. And C13, while it's not perfect, it would be an important step towards ensuring the future of English and French in this country. I hope we'll make history in official languages in 2022 with a finally modernized version of this act, which will allow us to move towards a future where our 2 official languages are better supported and defended across the country. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Cardinal and Chouinard. We'll start with the first round of questions, and then you'll be able to explain your positions in greater detail during these 6 minutes. So we're starting the first question. Mr. Richard Legault, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. First question, Ms. Cardinal. Your appointment to sit on a committee to make recommendations to a minister. You're making recommendations. I felt that you were putting a bit of pressure to accelerate the process. How do you see all of this? I find that somewhat particular, strange. In other words, I'm sorry, I'm hearing my voice echo. You're asking me if I have a conflict of interest? Yes, I sit on a committee for Bill C-32, not C-13, and do not be concerned, sir. I am no one's lackey, and I have the impression that with respect to Bill C-13, there is a very interesting compromise. That answers my question. Don't be concerned. I'm not concerned. I'm just asking questions. Ms. Cardinal, on your expert committee that made these recommendations with respect to private companies, they can opt for Quebec's legislation or the federal government's. Should this be the case or not? How do you see this in the context where private companies would be able to decide to opt for a the provincial or federal system.
Just had a bit of a glitch. I feel like you were talking about federally regulated private businesses in certain sectors, for example, communications, transportation, banks, agriculture, and so on. I think in that case, the minister should be answering that question. There will be two. Well, I'm asking you the question. Is it yes? Why? And if it's no, then why are you answering that way? Yes to what? Well, to the choice given to the private business, because in my sector there are some businesses that are involved and they just don't know which way it's going to go. What we have is an interesting example. The Minister Taylor will have to speak with Minister Lebel to have an agreement with the Quebec government on the question of applying the new bill on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses. I think that would be the most interesting. If they take or choose one system over the other one, that is a choice that they will make. But if you want to avoid, for example, anything that might be confusing, I think there should be an agreement signed between the federal government and the Quebec government. But that's not actually written in the bill. That's done afterwards, and that's done through dialogue between the federal and provincial instances. Ms. Chouinard, I'd like to hear you speak about the following. In the conclusion of your introduction, you talked about problems with regard to education and training. I'd like you to elaborate on that aspect. You mean with regards to post-secondary education? Well, I believe the committee is already in the know. They did a study last summer. There is a lack of funding within post-secondary minority institutions. We have already rang the alarm. Moncton, New Brunswick, and here in Ontario, this issue does exist. There are about 60 programs that have been cancelled at the Laurentian University, and more than 100 of my colleagues were actually shown the door in a rather poor fashion. The federal government is committed to supporting bilingual or minority institutions, and I do think that they can continue to do that. But it is important that the provinces don't become disengaged, or are not separated from this issue, which really is their responsibility. Is there anything lacking with regards to linguistic clauses in the bill? Not in the bill per se, but it's what will happen afterwards. The federal government can, of course, commit, but it's really with regards to the application of the law that we have to make sure that the provinces remain partners, and that they don't just let the federal government take over and take in all with regards to their support. 20 seconds. With regards to French as a common language in the workspace, you wrote that Bill C-13 transfers the responsibility towards the unions. Can you explain or expand on that? I don't think that I wrote that. I think that'll be all, Mr. Liu. Next question from Ms. Kayabaga for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll also thank the witnesses who are present today. Ms. Cardinal, I was present when the French University in Ontario was open, and as a Franco-Ontarian, I was very proud to be there, and so I'm happy to see you here today. Ms. Cardinal, you spoke about French immigration. What sort of recommendations would you add for Bill C-13 in order to ensure the following? With regards to French immigration and the desire to increase it overall in Canada and outside of Quebec, what other recommendations can you make? Keeping in mind that the largest population of francophones in the world is in Africa. Thank you so much, and congratulations to you for your election. What I recommend is not to add anything in the bill. What I want is for the bill to be adopted, and to be adopted quickly, because the longer we wait, the worse it will be for the communities. We will be in decline the more we wait, because we really have to work day to day in order to not decline as a population. That's my recommendation. However, we do need to have a separate program for immigration. I did write economic immigration, which is a mistake, but there is a part of it that has to do with economic immigration. And there are various categories, of course, but I don't know why we can't do that for the Canadian Francophonie. So, for example, having a Francophone immigration program that is that is separate from the other programs. The program should be provided for in the bill. I do think that really is essential. We can create pilot products. We can aim to have less ambitious targets federally, but more targeted locally, for example, in Moncton, Toronto, in St. Boniface, for example, and we could have pilot projects with teams who ensure the growth of or development of these programs in specific zones and regions. And we did speak about the following many times. We must not forget the following. From the beginning, we have to see how this will match up with other policies. You know, foreign policy, for example, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough embassies in Africa, for example. There's one office for all of the Africans who want to come to Canada. Well, I really do think that I'm not the only person asking for the following. People in international relations are asking for the same thing. We have to multiply the ability for people to apply. There's one office in Dakar. It might not be enough, especially if you're coming from elsewhere in Africa. Paris, that is not where African students can go and apply. So I do think that is important. We have to have ambitious goals. We have to take a step back as well and ensure that the immigration policy with regards to francophones will match up with other issues, and it will ensure that we have francophone immigration in Canada that will work. There is a fundamental contradiction between the fact that there are students coming to Canada that are francophones from Africa. Well, we want them to eventually participate in the labor shortage, and then we tell them that they actually have to go back home right afterwards. We have we have restrictive policies, but we tell them that if they're not planning on staying here, that they have to leave, for example. So there are certain contradictions politically. Indeed, I agree that we have to pass this bill very quickly. You also mentioned that this bill is realistic. What are the flaws that you see that this bill is actually fixing? Well, I don't want to amplify the flaws. Well, I mean what flaws were there that are now being solved by this bill? Oh, well, I am one of those who thinks that the targets and the goals are great. The problem is the implementation. The government has tools that do not correspond to the goals. That's the problem. So, for example, Clause 7, it took 13 years to implement it. Once we did, we implemented the action plans, which depend on the willingness of different political parties. So it changed a lot, and it's difficult to see any measurable factors in that case. I just want to say that there are 7 seconds left. I would like to let you finish, but I just want to thank you for supporting this bill. Well, then I will let others ask their questions. Thank you. Next question from the second vice chair, Mr. Mario Beaulieu. 6 minutes. Ms. Cardinal, you wrote that the future of French in North America will play itself out in Quebec because it's the only francophone nation in North America. There might be a redefining of federalism of Canada. Do you still agree with what you wrote? Absolutely. I know that only fools don't change their minds. But yes, indeed, I do agree with what I had. I do agree. And you do often repeat this quote, so thank you for reminding me, but I do know it by heart. But I will say that federalism or Canadian federalism must be as flexible as possible. We know that in societies where federalism allows minorities to be flexible, those are the most democratic ones. But also with regards to territorial integrity, it is important because, for example, theorists of the 19th century always say what's important is the territory. In our case, we have difficulties with regards to the territory, but there is also a constitutional principle. What we need as a francophone minority is institutions that are managed by and for francophones. The targets should be to reinforce the provincial responsibilities. Thank you. When I'm talking about territorial integrity in Quebec, you say that there's a good agreement. In that case, why did the Quebec government feel obliged to introduce their requests? They have already proposed a document with regards to their vision, but that's pretty superficial. With regards to territoriality, we're talking about making one language, a common language over one territory. It's what the Quebec government is doing, but the Canadian government is imposing its linguistic law and is promoting the idea of English being the official language in Quebec. And so it does with this not how do you support this bill when it has nothing to do with what Quebec has asked for? Well, I don't know how to make you change your mind because you did say that you would vote against it, but I never said, I don't think, that we were in the best of both worlds. The bill, the Official Languages Act ensures the promotion of French and English, but do not forget that in the new bill, there is a recognition that French is a vulnerable language all over North America and Canada, which includes Quebec. And I do think that that's progress. We do admit it, but what we asked is for there to be one minority language, and that's not in Bill C-13 because, well, what's happening is that the federal government's policies are only meant to strengthen English, so there's nothing very positive for French. If that doesn't change, then I think the federal government will continue to be a very important driver of English and anglicizing Quebec. I don't know how much if you really want me to respond to that, but this bill is a compromise. There is a recognition of the principle of real equality, which must guide linguistic equality. The target is the progression of French and English, and with regards to scientific language, the bill could have positive effects in Quebec because nothing says that French has to be promoted as a scientific language. It's quite the opposite. It says that it's everywhere in the world. Well, as a scientific language, the federal government gives 40% of its funding in 40% to English language, to the English language. Ms. Chouinard, I think what happened with André Laurent wanted a special status with Quebec, and we failed that. We wanted Quebec to be the only masters of what happens in their territory. Is this not once again a failed endeavor? 20 seconds. I do think you're maybe mistaken. You might be talking about Valérie Lapointe-Gagnon, who wrote a book on the Laurent Commission. So if I only have 20 seconds, I will stop there. Thank you, Ms. Chouinard and Ms. Beaulieu.
Next 6-minute question from Manitoba. Go ahead. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses who are with us today. My first question is for Ms. Chouinard. During the committee presentation, our teaching program was criticized by the Université francophone canadienne. It often works by bill, and Mr. Normand suggested that we need to have direct agreements with teaching institutions to better fund them. And it would fulfill a mandate established by the federal government under Section 7 of the OLA. You came to committee roughly a year ago to discuss funding gaps in post-secondary institutions, and you said that they were in a crisis and that the federal government has to play a role. We agree with what you said at committee, and we think that this role can be played by integrating the concept of linguistic clauses in agreements with provinces, or the government could intervene to defend Francophone rights like the SFCA is suggesting. What do you think of that proposal to add linguistic clauses to this legislation to define the federal government's responsibilities? Thank you for your question. Yes, I did mention that when I appeared at the committee before. I think that linguistic clauses would certainly help with that issue. It would allow the federal government to make structural investment in post-secondary education, even bearing in mind that the provinces still have a role to play. They cannot step back. And the provinces also have to continue to invest what they should invest in these institutions, which are in their own provinces, while ensuring that the federal government also can provide additional support to help these institutions given the special challenges they're facing in minority settings. Thank you, Madame Chouinard. My next question is for Ms. Cardinal. In the same vein, you said at committee last year that Section 7 of the OLA would allow the federal government to spend to ensure that Francophone communities in minority settings have access to funding. Sections 18 to 23 are based on this, for example. Do you think that if the federal government reaches agreements with institutions that offer services to Francophone communities in minority setting, that this would fulfill its mission? I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your question, Ms. Ashton. And I think it is related in many respects to the question you asked to Ms. Chouinard. Section 7 right now is criticized oh no, sorry, has been spelled out, and it would help these communities to thrive. Section 7, we have to look at it with respect to the objective of Francophone minorities that have to be, well, they have to have services and institutions developed for and by Francophones. We really have to discern whether this target will be met, and if we want to have agreements with these institutions, with universities and community organizations, within the objective of having for and by, yes, this is a good idea. These agreements would come once this bill is adopted. We need regulations, particularly with respect to linguistic clauses. We need directives to the departments that negotiate these agreements with the provinces. They have to be part of the written into the agreements. We need very specific directives from the Prime Minister's office, also in terms of the action plan, in terms of supporting communities and their development. Through consultations, it's clear. I participated in consultations, and there are others coming up. The communities were very clear about what they want. They want the by and for. We have to trust them. We have to talk about scholarships for students. We need pan-Canadian programs for students, international scholarships. There's a very long list, and the needs are great. And I think when this bill is adopted, it will allow us to take the next step. Thank you very much. My next question is going back to Ms. Chouinard. You said that the immigration policy in this bill is incomplete. Do you think we need stronger language so we can have targets for Francophone communities? And also, we know if policies fail, it's because implementation fails. But if we go further in the legislation and require the government to have these policies, we need strong language. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. I agree entirely with you. What we added to Section 7 with respect to immigration is a step in the right direction. We think there's a lack of action for 20 years in this area, and we need stronger language on immigration in this bill. And it also should be followed up with implementation policies, and it will allow us to really move forward on Francophone immigration at IRCC. Thank you very much, Ms. Ashton. Thank you, Ms. Chouinard and Ms. Cardinal. Thank you very much. It's not the first time we've heard you at committee, and every time you share your knowledge with great passion. What I'd like to tell you, as I said, we had to shorten our meeting because of votes at the House. But if there's any information you believe should be transmitted to us, please do not hesitate to do so by writing to the clerk, who will send us the information. So please send this information. Point of order. Yes, Mr. Genereux. We didn't discuss whether we'd continue the meeting until 6 p.m. tonight, since we weren't able to start earlier. That's a good point of order. No, it wasn't possible due to technical issues. We were not able to sit longer than 5:30. That's why we shortened the meeting. Is that what you're saying? We're not able to do so? Yes, unfortunately. So yes, thank you very much. We're going to suspend temporarily to allow our next witnesses to set up. Thank you.
Donc, rebonjour à
Hello again, everyone. I would now like to, for this next hour, welcome our witnesses. Ms. Carole Jolin, President of the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario, and Mr. Peter Holmanuk, General Director, as well as Martin Théberge and Véronique Mallet from the Société Nationale de l'Acadie. So what we do usually, as you know, we'll allow you 5 minutes each to do your speech, truly 5 minutes, because then you'll be able to share your thoughts and knowledge with us when we ask questions. So we'll start now with the AFO. Go ahead, you have 5 minutes. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to join you here today to consider Bill C-13. I'd like to thank you for inviting the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario to testify as part of your work. We represent nearly 744,000 Franco-Ontarians. And I'd like to say that I'm here today accompanied by AFO's Executive Director, Peter Holmanuk. AFO has welcomed the tabling of Bill C-13 on March 1st. Our community and its partners in other provinces and territories have worked for almost 6 years to convince the government of the importance of modernizing the OLA. This contains interesting initiatives for our community, such as the bilingualism of Supreme Court judges and the review of the Act every 10 years, as is currently the case in Canada and now in Ontario, as well as the entrenchment of the Court Challenges program. As you continue your study, I'd like to mention a few proposals that are dear to our communities. We support this legislation because it solves key issues, and we believe that it should have the maximum impact once it's passed. The most important point concerns the role of the Treasury Board as the central coordinating agency for the implementation of the Act. Second is the importance of C-13 to the development of Franco-Ontarian communities, particularly during intergovernmental agreements. And finally, the Francophone immigration policy. The fundamental problem with this Act over the past 30 years is that Canadian heritage cannot impose action on other government departments. We strongly encourage that the Treasury Board be designated as the only central agency for implementing this legislation and to centralize it and give it full coordinating powers. I'd like to be clear. We don't want to take away the political role that Canadian heritage plays or reduce its capacity to develop and manage programs. However, Canadian heritage cannot, by its very nature, ensure that there's a consistent implementation of the Act across all the departments. Only a central agency could do this effectively. The question of integrating language clauses is another point worthy of consideration. Bill C-13, as presented, does not require the negotiation of language clauses in federal and territorial agreements. These clauses are necessary to ensure compliance with federal official language commitments when funds are provided to provinces and territories. One recent example is found in the federal-provincial childcare negotiations. We still don't know if the childcare program contains language clauses. There's still a lack of clarity in this respect. Currently, with this modernization, the government has the opportunity to strengthen and make linguistic duality mandatory in agreements with provinces and territories. It would send a strong signal to all Francophones in Canada. To conclude, I would like to discuss immigration. Francophone immigration is a driving force behind the vitality of communities in minority settings. The bill states that immigration policy must include a target and accountability measures, but it doesn't say what these will be in specific terms. We know that the federal target for Francophone immigration is far from being met, and this has been the case for many years. If this trend continues, the government will not meet its target planned for 2023, which continues to contribute to the decline of the demographic weight of French in our community. One of the consequences of not meeting this target is the growing Francophone and bilingual labor shortage. This phenomenon has an impact on all sectors, private, government, and nonprofit. There's simply not enough qualified labor to serve Francophones, and to overcome this shortage, immigration, as well as the full continuum of education from early childhood to post-secondary, is essential. The Act should specify the objectives of the Francophone immigration policy that it proposes in its new form. This way, this new legislation could give new life to our communities. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and I remain at your disposal for any questions you may have. Thank you very much. Perfect. SNA, Monsieur Théberge.
Merci de me donner la chance de présenter.
In the last 5 minutes, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the vision of the SNA on Bill C-13. I won't go into a long presentation. I will simply point out that since 1881, SNA has been the voice of the Acadian people, defending their values and interests. Bill C-13, to amend the Official Languages Act, emphasizes the importance of recognizing the unique character of French language in Canada, the pursuit of substantive equality between English and French, and finally, the need to develop strong institutions for the development of French in Canada. In our opinion, it is therefore appropriate to view the development of the official languages in an asymmetrical manner in order to give French, which is the most vulnerable language, the means necessary for its development and growth. This requires strong and adequately supported action by the Acadian civil diplomacy, which is an important development tool for our communities. Civil diplomacy serves to strengthen our identity. It is when the Acadians feel that they are represented on the international scene that they become fully aware of the imagined country that is theirs. Without a state institution of its own, the Acadians it's revealed when the SNA is present in an international context alongside heads of state when our flag flies in France, Belgium, Louisiana, or Switzerland, and when we have a platform at UNESCO, for example. The pride and sense of identity that come from this are essential to community involvement. Our international action also gives it a great deal of legitimacy among citizens and the English-speaking majority. The Sommet de la Francophonie and visits by heads of state are proof of the attractiveness of the Acadian nation, if you will. Recently, provincial ministers accompanied the SNA on an official mission to France. They had the opportunity to meet the President of the Republic and some of the French counterparts, an opportunity that would be unthinkable in other circumstances. All of this goes a long way in promoting Acadia as in its region.
Consulat général de
Finally, civil diplomacy is an important promotional vehicle for Acadia. Our Atlantic Committee on Francophone Immigration promotes Acadia as a land of welcome for immigrants from the international Francophonie. This tool is essential to reach the Francophone immigration targets in Canada. In the same vein, our society promotes artists, Acadian artists on the international scene, and allows them to shine beyond our borders. It also connects producers, artistic agents, and venue managers in the international Francophone community. Finally, apologies.
Elle met aussi en lien producteurs, agents artistiques et directeurs.
Finally, the Office of International Mobility in Acadia offers young Francophones and Francophiles support for their international mobility projects. For example, in 2018 and 2019 alone, the office hosted 2 young French civic service interns, while 2 Acadians did a semester abroad in France, and 2 others a professional internship in Louisiana and Belgium. All these structuring actions are a feat as they are currently carried out with more enthusiasm and individual commitment than financial resources. This state of affairs also prevents the NLS from taking advantage of important opportunities for both the Acadian people and Canada. In the context of Bill C-13, the SNA therefore insists on the importance of Canadian government recognizing the specificity of Acadia and its spokesperson, the SNA, as a privileged actor in civil diplomacy and giving it the means to pursue its work. We are in the final stages of writing our brief and we'll send it to you as soon as it's ready. In conclusion, allow me to clearly summarize the recommendations that will be found in it and that stem from what I have just presented you. We recommend that the Canadian government recognize the specificity of Acadia as an actor in civil diplomacy, that the SNA be recognized as a spokesperson for the Acadian nation and therefore the bearer of this civil diplomacy, that the privileged relationship between France and Acadia be recognized, and that that there be adequate support to accompany this recognition. That the Government of Canada develop a civil diplomacy strategy developed in a transversal manner with civil society and governmental actors from multiple sectors such as the economy, culture, and education and immigration. That civil society actions such as the promotion of Acadian artists, the mobility of young Acadians, and Francophone immigration to Acadia be funded from a national and international perspective. That the government support international twinning initiatives and the creation of the Commission or the Acadian Commission for International Cooperation. Thank you.
Berge, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, 59 seconds. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We will go to the first round of questions, 6 minutes for each party. We will start with Mr. Richard Leroux for 6 minutes. No, it's Mr. Gourde. Sorry, according to the document here, it said you, but I will go on to Mr. Gourde for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to the witnesses for being present. It's very important because your testimonies will make a difference with regards to the elaboration of this report. Mr. Jolin, you talked a lot about the Treasury Board and the importance of a central agency. Can you expand? Something's been happening for the past 50 years. We had to rely, well, it was Heritage Canada that had that responsibility, and it doesn't actually have any power on the departments. So they did the work, they made recommendations to the minister, and it was up to the minister they were free to either implement them or not, 25%, 50%, 100% of the time, or not at all. And so if we do want to make sure that Francophonie progresses thanks to this bill, we do need an organization that has power over the ministry. And what we identified was the Treasury Board. So it's not a question of removing all of the work from Heritage Canada. They would continue to manage the programs as they have been doing for many years and been doing very well. But with regards to implementing the law, we want only the Treasury Board to be in charge. In the bill, as it is presented in this draft, we do let the Treasury Board, we do allow for them to delegate its responsibilities, and it's very important for this not to be part of the actual bill once it is passed, because we need a Treasury Board that will actually take care 100% all alone of the coordination of the implementation of the bill. This will ensure that the departments respect the recommendations and the work that is done instead of the ongoing situation. Thank you, Mr. Jolin. You did talk about Immigration Canada. There's a lot of hope placed on immigration. We hope that it will help us increase the number of Francophones in Canada. But they look to us, well, the delays are far too long. Do we put too much hope on the Canadian government, or should we reform it completely? There's a lot of work to be done, starting with Bill C-13. We did see that there are good targets in Bill C-13, but there are no targets. We don't know how the ministry will actually take action. If we think that there is a labor shortage in general, in the rest of Canada, well, it is even worse among Francophones. We are trying to improve French service in French, but we do need staff in order to do that. And right now, we do need a lot of French immigration. What we heard recently with regards to French Francophone immigrants who were having trouble getting their visa to come study here, Ms. Cardinal spoke about that. When there's a single bureau or office in Dakar for 12 countries. Well, if we're trying to take this seriously, first we need to open visa offices in many different places in Africa in order to allow people to apply. And then once they're here, to facilitate how they are welcomed and to make sure that once they're done studying that they can stay. I know that there's an option they can tick off in their application, and if they tick off that they want to stay in Canada after their studies are done, their visas are rejected. And so we really have to make sure that that this immigration is accepted, and so to make sure that when the candidate has their diploma, and their degree, they can actually stay here, preferably in Ontario, and this would help us facilitate the process, and they can stay here permanently. Mr. Jolin, short question. Next nomination at the Superior Courts in Canada will determine the willingness of the government to go ahead with C-13. However, historically, this government has always named Anglophones. Do you think that they would make the same mistake again? Well, I hope not. This is an opportunity. The government, during the throne speech, did say that they would commit to making different decisions, and in the bill, we do see that there is the nomination of a bilingual judge to the Supreme Court. And we certainly hope that if they talk the talk, they will walk the walk. 20 seconds. 20 seconds. Well, then, thank you to the witnesses. It was very interesting. Thank you. I do hope that everybody could have their full 6 minutes. Mr. Drouin for the next 6 minutes. Thank you. I would like to say in front of this committee that I have the opportunity of representing the greatest head of an association, Mr. Hominique, and Mr. Jolin is my neighbor, so, it's my riding, so he's also very competent and fantastic. When we talk about the responsibilities of the Treasury Board, we talked about it a lot with regards to Francophonie. We often said that Heritage Canada encourages, but that it's not enough. We heard Ms. Cardinal speak about this. There are different opinions in the Francophonie. Some people say that the role should be clearly defined within the Treasury Board, which would make sure that they don't delegate their power. But I would like to give you certain examples where they delegate power, but that the Treasury Board still does take its full responsibilities. We know that the Treasury Board is not going to speak to Francophone communities. That's not their role. But it is their role to say, listen, Finance Canada, Heritage Canada, public safety, you have responsibilities that are very clear. You said that C-13, for example, if it is adopted, will delegate power. But here are the rules that you have to respect. If you want a funding project to be adopted, for example, here is what you need to do. And if you don't, then it will not pass at the Treasury Board. So have you had the opportunity to have these conversations with experts, among those who have worked within the government? And what's the difference between the responsibilities and the delegation? Well, there are experts who work there, but if I talk about, the Acadian side of things, things must be clear, and it cannot be a lottery that, to figure out if it's going to be done part of the way, because a government can come in with a different vision and then we are back at square one. So the position that we share with the Francophone and Acadian Federation is that there be the coordination of the implementation be done by the Treasury Board. And the part that talks about delegation should not be there and be removed. We're not saying that they should not consult anyone else or any other ministers, but we do think that the Treasury Board must be the leader. I do meet the same people as you do. I have experience in procurement, and I was a specialist for 10 years. The Treasury Board implies the policy, but doesn't actually do any procurement themselves. They do have responsibilities with HR, but they don't actually do any HR other than their own ministry. They delegate to others, but they have to respect the policy. And if they don't, then the Treasury Board comes and sees them and says, you're not doing what you're supposed to, and all the funding that you've required we will not go forth with it. So we do share the same goal, but maybe going about it is a little bit different. You said clearly that Heritage Canada has to continue with its role with regards to within the communities because they have that experience. In principle, the Treasury Board would, well, what would happen is that the Treasury Board would tell them that you have this consultation role, and they would do that. And so we know that Bill C-13 is probably going to be not adopted tomorrow, but probably in the fall. But I'm saying it publicly because when you and I will no longer be here, people must understand that they must understand the next modifications. And what you're saying with regards to the Treasury Board and the power they have with regards to funding, well, why are we talking about modifications to C-13 and why do we want better coordination? Well, if the Treasury Board has that power, then why haven't they used it more in the past 50 years? Well, it has to. That's the difference. Exactly, but I don't see that. I see the coordination element, which is very important, and I see, less delegation because we know what that means, and the fear that we have is that there will be some changes at some point because there are changes within the government over the years, and that one government will decide or administration will decide that they should delegate a little bit more, and they delegate to different ministries the entire implementation issue. What I'm saying is that if the federal government is unable to change the responsibilities with the provinces, do you still agree with that? Yes, indeed. I agree as well. So who cares who actually fulfills this responsibility as long as we actually reach the goals? Yes, the goal is to improve Francophone immigration. Thank you, Mr. Jolin. Thank you.
5h30.
So, sorry, Mr. Beaulieu, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Sirs, the Treasury Board, you think it's essential to have it as the centralizing agency. We heard Ms. Tardinel said that she didn't agree with that. Do you understand this objection and why we should maintain this proposal? That's an expert opinion. We worked closely with people who are well aware of this legislation and official languages, and the position that was put forward and advised to us by very competent individuals was to ensure the implementation of this legislation by the Treasury Board in all aspects. After 50 years of official languages, the assimilation rate of Francophones goes down with every census, even though Ontario wasn't quite as bad during the last census, but it's stayed relatively the same. But we need a change. Otherwise, the trend is obviously going downward with respect to French. We need a major change. And this brings me back to what the Acadian from New Brunswick said. You said that you agree with asymmetrical approach. I agree with that. I think Quebec has been asking for that since forever. So in Acadia, how would that apply? Do you agree, for example, in the Quebec government's demands for federal institutions, they want them to fit with the objectives of the Quebec Charter of French Language? Should federal institutions have to have predominant French if they're under federal jurisdiction? We want to make sure that administrators of these institutions understand French. If I may, I'd like to say that the Société Nationale de l'Acadie is 4 provinces, not just New Brunswick. But to answer your question, I'm far from being an expert on Quebec. But when we talk about an asymmetrical approach, we mean we want a regional approach and understanding Acadia's specific nature and needs. Aside from all this, we also have to recognize that we need this new legislation. We need to have it adopted. Things are falling behind, and we're looking at everything that's happening, and we're very sad about this because, in our view, every day that there's a delay is a day where we're taking a step back because that's what's going on right now. So we have to move forward with this bill. And when we talk about an asymmetrical approach, we're talking about recognition of Acadia and its specific nature. For example, when we're talking about Quebec's demands and a different legislation, and the Anglophone community in Quebec have different needs, as well as minority settings outside of Quebec. I'm not sure how you see this. In the past, there were alliances. Recently, there was an article. Mr. Jolin, this question may be for you. An article said that the federal government should separate Quebec Anglophones from other minorities. The question should not be, should the federal government stop separating Quebec Anglophones from Francophones in general? I think I can recognize that based on the current situation in Canada, there can be different needs, and we also need to recognize Quebec's different needs. I have no problem with that, but as I said earlier, Acadia also has special needs. We already have agreements with New Brunswick, other area jurisdictions in France, and we also met with President Macron last year, and this is the proof that Acadian specificity is being recognized, and we have a different history, and our development is also different. In the Atlantic provinces, there is recognition from France, and this allows us to achieve different results. And this is what makes us complementary. We also have an agreement with Quebec to recognize the Quebec nation and the Acadian nation, and we want to move in that direction. I agree with that because I consider that Acadians do form a people and a nation, and they should be able to be represented internationally. But let's go back to the question of immigration, Francophone immigration. Some researchers have said that Francophone immigrants to Ontario outside of Quebec, even Quebecers when they go outside of Quebec, they're often assimilated with other Francophones. How should we fight that? We do have Francophone communities across Ontario. They are strong. We work hard to welcome these immigrants. We make a lot of efforts in this respect, and these Francophones come to our communities. They can find work and prosper, and obviously our organizations do need funding to be able to do this work, and they have to do it to the best of their capacity. They're already doing this because there are great needs. Thank you, Mr. Jolin. Last question, 6 minutes from the NDP. Ms. Ashton, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses today. My first question is for Mr. Theberge. You testified earlier this year about the importance of Canada of having a Francophone immigration policy. and this will now be under the OLA. Moreover, this is a request that our former chair also made under the previous parliament. The FCA wants to amend the language around this policy in the Act and give us a policy that would reestablish the weighting of Francophones in Canada. Do you think that we should repair decades of failure in Canada with its first immigration policy to protect the demographic weighting of Francophones? The short answer is yes, absolutely, 100%. To expand a bit, not only do we need to reestablish it, we shouldn't treat this as something we should do in silo. We shouldn't just talk about immigration as such. We also have to talk about diplomacy, education, and the needs and the specificities of our regions. So yes, we have to reestablish this political weighting, but we shouldn't look at this independently from the rest of the efforts that need to be made. Thank you. My next question, in the same vein, is for Mr. Jolin. We know that Francophone communities. Sorry, you suggested when you testified on our study on Francophone immigration that our immigration policy should be specified. Do you also think we should clearly have targets? Yes, we do need such targets, because what's been happening is, for quite some time, is that we're losing our demographic weighting. 10% of Francophones were present in Ontario before, and now it's less than 5%, and the number continues to decline. So we need to give this a boost, and we can't continue to see 2.1% of Francophone immigration per year. We need to increase this number, and if we continue to lose our demographic weighting, then what will happen? Our services will decline, because they'll say you no longer have critical mass to receive such services. So for Francophone communities, for them to be able to survive, we have to make sure that not only do we meet our targets and even exceed them, because we've lost a lot of time over the past 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Jolin. On another theme, first, I'd like to congratulate you for talking about the example of the federal-provincial agreement on childcare. We really have to look at the importance of linguistic clauses. In terms of improvements we need to make to C13, this is something we've heard on several occasions at committee, and it's something I've also spoken about because it reflects the reality of Francophone communities here. We know that when they do have French services in French, there's a real battle. For example, the Montfort Hospital, that's one example. If there were linguistic clauses, do you think that this would help Francophone communities in Ontario and elsewhere to obtain services in French? Yes, it would help us achieve services in French. First, if it was mandatory for provinces to, through the Official Languages Act, to offer services in both languages or offer programs that are bilingual, it would be essential. And obviously, it would allow our communities to receive services. Sometimes it's a vicious cycle. We want services, but we also need people to whom we can give them. There are many dimensions to this issue that need to be looked at to improve services in French. And if we have linguistic clauses, it would not give governments the choice. They'd have to make sure that work is done in both languages. And as we've said in our notes, if the government doesn't want to move forward on this, we could work with Francophone communities to make sure that these programs are implemented. Quickly, when you appeared last year, you suggested that the modernization of the OLA includes accountability. so that the amount the federal government invests in post-secondary education in French is stronger. You made comments with respect to what happened with the Laurentian University. Can you propose amendments for Francophone clauses? Do you think it's part of the solution?
Un élément important.
That's an important component, yes, because in the current situation at Laurentian University, it's really hard to know where the government's funding has gone in terms of services in French. And we hope that there will be more details provided when the Auditor General publishes their report, because we asked them to look at the funding from the federal government to know where it went for French programs and services at the university. And we're looking forward to seeing this report, because in Sudbury, there are serious doubts. We're wondering where this money went. Thank you very much, Ashton, and thank you very much to our witnesses today. Yes, Mr. Drouin, I just want to do what we do with other witnesses, since the AFO and Mr. Theberge don't have much time. I'd like us to re-invite them because they're very important. Thank you. Yes, it's very important. I'd also like to add, like I did for the first panel, if you have any information that you believe is necessary for us to know, please communicate your suggestions to our clerk. She will share it with all the members of the committee. So thank you very much once again for being here on the Official Languages Committee. It's always very pleasant to have you here and to hear what you have to share. So the meeting is adjourned.